Clara Whitfield arrived in Milbrook, Nebraska territory in May 1883 to take the position of postmistress, the first woman to hold that position in a town that wasn't entirely sure women should hold positions at all. She was 28 years old, unmarried by deliberate choice, and possessed opinions about architecture that would make her the subject of ridicule for 6 months before making her the reason 18 people survived the worst blizzard Nebraska had seen in 20 years. The Postal Service provided a small salary and the requirement that she live within sight of the post office building. They didn't provide housing. Clara needed to build her own cabin on the quarter-acre lot adjacent to the post office. Most postmasters built standard frontier cabins, 16 by 20 feet minimum. Proper size for a family, adequate space for entertaining, large enough to seem respectable. Clara built an 8 by 10 foot cabin, 80 square feet total, smaller than most people's bedrooms. A structure so tiny that when the framing went up, people assumed she was building a storage shed. She wasn't building a shed. She was building the most thermally efficient dwelling in Nebraska territory, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Clara had grown up in Massachusetts, daughter of a shipwright who built cabins on sailing vessels where every cubic foot of space mattered, where heating efficiency meant survival on winter crossings, where compact design was engineering rather than compromise. She'd watched her father create living spaces of 8 by 8 feet that comfortably housed sailors for months at sea. Spaces that stayed warm with minimal fuel because small volumes heat efficiently. Frontier builders didn't think like shipwrights. They built big because land was cheap and lumber was available, and bigger seemed better. Nobody calculated heating costs. Nobody considered that every additional cubic foot of interior space required more fuel to maintain temperature. Nobody understood that a 16 by 20 foot cabin with 8-foot ceilings contained 2,560 cubic feet of air that needed heating, while her 8 by 10 cabin with 7-foot ceilings contained 560 cubic feet. 1/5 the volume, 1/5 the heating requirement. She designed her tiny cabin with the precision her father had taught her. 8 feet wide, 10 feet long, 7-foot ceiling height. A sleeping loft above, accessed by a ladder, adding another 40 square feet of space under a sloped roof. Total living area, 120 square feet across 2 levels. The main floor would contain a compact cast-iron stove positioned centrally, a narrow bed that doubled as seating, a small table that folded against the wall, and minimal storage. The loft would be pure sleeping space, warmed by heat rising from the stove below. 2 people could sleep in the loft, 1 on the main floor bed, 3 people total capacity for regular living. But in an emergency, the space could hold far more. People could sit shoulder to shoulder on the floor, could layer themselves in the loft, could pack tightly because the entire volume would be uniformly warm from a single small stove, burning minimal wood. She took her plans to William Schaefer, the town's primary builder, and the man everyone consulted for construction advice. He looked at her drawings and laughed. Not politely, actually laughed. "Miss Whitfield, these are dimensions for a storage shed. You can't live in 8 by 10 feet. That's not a cabin, that's a box. It's a thermally efficient dwelling designed for single occupancy with minimal heating costs. Every measurement is intentional. Every cubic foot serves a purpose. It's tiny, absurdly tiny. People will think you're poor, will think the Postal Service isn't paying you adequately, will question why the postmistress lives in something smaller than their chicken coops. People can think what they want. I'm building for thermal efficiency, not social status. This cabin will stay warm with 1/5 the firewood a standard cabin requires. That's engineering, not poverty." Schaefer set down her drawings with the finality of someone ending a foolish conversation. "I won't build this. It's embarrassing. Makes me look like I don't know proper construction. Build a normal cabin like everyone else. 16 by 20 minimum. That's respectable. That's adequate." Clara tried 2 other builders. Both refused. Both said the same things. Too small, not proper, build bigger, be normal. She decided to build it herself. She'd helped her father build ship's cabins since age 12, working in his Massachusetts shipyard during summers and after school. Understood framing timber selection, joinery techniques that created watertight seals, weatherproofing methods that had to withstand Atlantic storms. Could handle construction of 80 square feet if she applied Shipwright precision to frontier materials. She started in June, working evenings after her postal duties ended at 4 p.m. and on Saturdays when the post office closed at noon. The work had to be meticulous. Every joint had to be tight. Every measurement had to be exact. In ship construction, errors meant leaks and structural failure. The same principles applied to frontier cabin building, just with different consequences. First, she laid the stone foundation, collected flat stones from the creek 2 miles outside town, hauling them in a borrowed cart. The foundation had to be exactly 8 feet by 10 feet, not 8 feet 1 inch or 7 feet 11 inches. Precision mattered. She mortared the stones carefully, creating a raised base 6 inches above grade for drainage and airflow beneath the structure. Then the frame. She selected her lumber personally at the mill, choosing straight 2x4 Douglas fir for studs, rejecting any pieces with significant knots or warping. Built the frame with studs spaced 16 inches on center, standard construction, but with joinery her father had taught her. Each connection secured with both nails and wooden pegs. Each corner braced at 45-degree angles for wind resistance. The walls rose 7 feet high exactly, not 7 feet 2 inches for comfort, not 6 feet 10 inches to save lumber. 7 feet provided adequate headroom while minimizing volume. Every inch of height added 8 cubic feet to the interior space, 8 cubic feet that would require heating. She calculated precisely. The sleeping loft was the clever part. Built at 4 feet above the floor, accessed by a fixed ladder of 6 rungs, the loft created 40 square feet of sleeping space under the steep roof pitch, with 3 feet of clearance at the peak, enough to sit up but not stand. Heat from the stove below would rise directly into the loft, creating the warmest sleeping space with no additional heating required. She framed the roof with a steep pitch, 8-inch rise per 12-inch run, designed for Nebraska snow load and rapid water drainage. Covered it with cedar shingles, she split herself from logs, overlapping them in the technique her father had taught her for ship's deck sealing. Every shingle positioned to shed water away from the previous course. No water penetration possible. The door placement was calculated for solar gain, south-facing to catch maximum winter sun. The single window also faced south, a small 4-pane window that provided light and ventilation while minimizing heat loss. She caulked every gap with oakum and tar, the same materials ships used for watertight sealing. By late July, the structure was weather-tight and complete. Clara moved in her minimal possessions brought from Massachusetts, a narrow bed her father had built for ship's officer quarters, a folding table designed for galley use, compact storage boxes that fit precisely under the bed, everything sized for tight spaces, everything selected for efficiency rather than display. The cabin was indeed tiny. Walking from door to back wall took 3 steps. Standing at the center, she could touch both side walls by extending her arms. The loft required crawling to access the sleeping space. Everything was compact, close, efficient. The town's reaction was immediate mockery. The postmistress lived in a dollhouse. The grown woman who handled everyone's mail resided in a structure smaller than most tool sheds. The educated Easterner clearly didn't understand frontier living. Margaret Foster, wife of the general store owner, organized what she called a neighborly concern visit, but was actually an intervention. "Clara, dear, we're worried. You've built something unsuitable for human habitation. It's a shed, a storage building. You can't possibly live comfortably in such cramped quarters." Let me speak with my husband about arranging credit for proper construction. You could build a real cabin, something appropriate for a woman of your position. This is appropriate for my needs. It's thermally efficient, structurally sound, and costs minimal firewood to heat. Everything I require fits comfortably. It's embarrassing, for you and for the town. Our postmistress lives in the smallest dwelling in Milbrook. People talk. They wonder if we're paying you adequately. If you're struggling financially, if there's some problem we should address. There's no problem. This is intentional design based on thermal engineering principles. I'm not struggling. I'm being efficient. It's not normal. Women don't live in spaces this small by choice. It suggests instability, poor judgment, the kind of thing that makes people question your capability to manage the post office properly. The implication was clear. If Clara continued living in her embarrassingly tiny cabin, if she persisted in this bizarre display of abnormal living, the community might petition the postal service for a more conventional postmistress, someone who understood proper frontier standards. Clara ignored the pressure, lived in her 80 square feet through summer and into autumn. The cabin was indeed compact but perfectly functional. She could prepare meals on the small stove, could sleep comfortably in the loft, could conduct all necessary daily activities within the tiny space. And as autumn progressed toward winter, she noticed something her neighbors didn't yet understand. Her cabin warmed completely in 15 minutes of stove operation. Their large cabins took an hour to reach the same temperature. She burned maybe 2 logs to heat her space for an evening. They burned 8 or 10 logs for the same duration. Small volume meant efficient heating, meant less wood consumption, meant lower costs and less labor. Everything her father had taught her about ship's cabins applied perfectly to frontier living. Compact was superior for thermal efficiency. Tiny was actually smart. November brought cold weather, temperature dropping to 20 degrees overnight. Clara's neighbors were burning wood steadily, maintaining fires from evening through morning. Clara burned wood for 30 minutes before bed, and her tiny cabin stayed at 60 degrees all night from retained heat in the small air volume. People noticed her minimal smoke output, noticed her small woodpile, drew the wrong conclusions. The postmistress was cold, was suffering in her tiny space, was too proud to admit the dollhouse didn't work. Then December came, and with it came weather that would prove exactly how well the dollhouse worked. The blizzard arrived December 22nd with virtually no warning. Morning was cold but clear, temperature around 20 degrees, normal for late December Nebraska. People went about daily activities. Clara sorted mail at the post office. Children played outside in moderate cold. Women prepared for Christmas 2 days away. By noon, something changed. The temperature had dropped to 0 degrees in 6 hours. The sky turned gray-white in a way that long-time Nebraska residents recognized as dangerous. The wind shifted to come from directly north, bringing Arctic air straight down from Canada with nothing to stop it across 1,000 miles of open prairie. By 2 p.m., the first snow began, not gentle flakes suggesting gradual accumulation, heavy, dense snow that fell so thick it created whiteout conditions within minutes. Visibility dropped to nothing. You couldn't see across the street, couldn't see your own fence line. The world became white noise. Temperature kept dropping. 0 became -5. -5 became -10. The wind built from 20 miles per hour to 30, then 40, then sustained at 50 miles per hour. The combination of -15 degrees and 50-mile-per-hour wind created effective temperature approaching -50 degrees. Exposed skin froze in under 2 minutes. Breathing unprotected air burned lungs. This wasn't normal Nebraska winter. This was Arctic assault. By 4 p.m., when Clara normally closed the post office, the town was already in crisis mode. She made the short walk from the post office to her cabin, maybe 30 yards total, and arrived with frost forming on her eyebrows from her own breath. Inside her tiny cabin, she lit her small stove, and within 10 minutes, the space was at 65 degrees. 560 cubic feet, heated almost instantly. Her neighbors in their large cabins were already struggling. The Morrison family in their standard 16 by 20 cabin was burning wood continuously and watching interior temperature drop despite maximum heating efforts. 2,560 cubic feet was too much volume to maintain in -15-degree weather with wind pulling heat through every tiny gap. The Schmidt cabin, even larger at 20 by 20 feet with 9-foot ceilings, 3,600 cubic feet, couldn't maintain 50 degrees despite the stove glowing red-hot from continuous maximum burn. Their children were showing the first signs of dangerous cold exposure, lethargy, confusion, the early stages of hypothermia developing indoors. By midnight, the temperature outside had reached -30 degrees, with wind still at 50 miles per hour. -65 effective temperature, conditions that killed exposed livestock within minutes, conditions that overwhelmed any structure that wasn't perfectly sealed and efficiently heated. At 1 a.m., Clara heard desperate pounding on her door. Opened it to find Thomas Morrison, frost-covered and barely able to speak from cold exposure despite the short walk from his cabin 50 yards away. "We're freezing," he managed, voice hoarse. "Can't keep the cabin warm. Children are hypothermic. Can we come here, please?" Clara looked at her tiny space, 8 by 10 feet. Could she fit 5 additional people? She did the calculation in seconds. The mathematics her father had taught her. Body heat from 6 people would add approximately 600 BTU per hour. The small stove would provide another 4,000 BTU. Total of 4,600 BTU heating 560 cubic feet. That was more than adequate. The tight space would actually benefit from body heat concentration. "Yes, bring your family, quickly." The Morrison family arrived within 15 minutes, Thomas carrying their youngest child, his wife holding the hands of the 2 older children, all 5 showing signs of dangerous cold exposure despite living only 50 yards away. They crowded into Clara's tiny cabin, 5 people plus Clara, 6 total in 80 square feet. They sat on the floor around the small stove, shoulders touching, pressed together in the compact space. Within 20 minutes, everyone was warm. The children's color returned. The dangerous lethargy faded. The tiny space that seemed absurdly cramped became perfect for concentrating warmth. An hour later, more desperate knocking. The Schmidt family, 6 people, including 4 children. Then the Johanssons, 4 more people. Then the Hendersons, whose stovepipe had cracked, filling their cabin with smoke. By 3 a.m., 18 people were packed into Clara's 80-square-foot cabin. The logistics seemed impossible, but Clara organized it with the same efficiency her father used for ship's crew quarters, where space was absolute and every person had to fit. Main floor. 6 adults, sitting with backs against the walls, knees drawn up, shoulders touching. 3 more adults sitting in the center facing the stove, legs extended between the others. Total of 9 adults on the main floor in approximately 60 square feet after accounting for the stove's footprint. The sleeping loft. 9 children ranging from age 3 to 12, layered like cordwood but warm and safe. The smallest children in the warmest center positions, older children at the edges where headroom was minimal. Every child touching another, sharing body heat, creating a mass of warmth 3 feet below the peaked roof that was capturing all the rising heat. The space that looked absurd for 1 person functioned perfectly for 18, because Clara had understood the mathematics that everyone else had ignored. 18 people at rest, each generate 100 BTU of body heat per hour, 1,800 BTU total. The small stove, burning 4 split logs, generated another 4,000 BTU. Total heat output, 5,800 BTU, warming 560 cubic feet of space. That worked out to more than 10 BTU per cubic foot per hour. A conventional 16 by 20 cabin with the same 18 people would have the same 5,800 BTU trying to heat 2,560 cubic feet, less than 2.5 BTU per cubic foot. The difference between 68 degrees and 45 degrees, between comfortable and dangerously cold. Clara explained this to Thomas Morrison as they sat shoulder to shoulder on the main floor at 4 a.m. while others slept in shifts around them. Explained how volume math determined survival in extreme cold, how her father had taught her these calculations for ships' cabins in Arctic crossings where heating failure meant death. "We're burning 4 logs every 3 hours, she said quietly. "In my cabin alone, I'd burn 2 logs every 4 hours. The 18 of us together are using less total fuel than we would in our separate homes, and we're all warmer. That's the efficiency of small volume plus body heat concentration." Thomas looked around the tiny packed space, looked at his children sleeping safe and warm in the loft above, looked at Clara, who'd understood something everyone else had completely missed. "We mocked this cabin," he said. "Called it a dollhouse. Said you didn't understand frontier living. We were idiots. You understood survival mathematics we didn't even know existed." Clara managed the stove carefully, fed it minimal wood, maintained temperature without waste, made coffee for the adults on the small stovetop, rationed the limited food she had, kept watch while others slept in shifts, packed together in warmth that their large cabins couldn't provide. The blizzard raged outside for 30 straight hours, minus 30 degrees sustained, wind never dropping below 40 miles per hour, snow falling continuously until 3 feet accumulated. Conditions that killed unprepared people, conditions that tested every assumption about adequate shelter. Through all of it, Clara's tiny cabin maintained 18 people at comfortable temperature with minimal fuel consumption. The dollhouse everyone had mocked functioned exactly as Shipwright engineering predicted. Small volume meant efficient heating, rapid warmth, low fuel requirements, and perfect conditions for emergency crowding. When the storm finally broke on December 24th morning, families began emerging from Clara's cabin into a transformed world. 3 feet of snow covered everything. The temperature was still minus 15 degrees, but the wind had stopped. The deadly conditions had passed. They walked back to their own cabins through waist-deep snow, found their large homes barely above freezing inside, despite having burned continuously before evacuating, found their wood supplies dangerously depleted from desperate heating attempts, understood with absolute clarity that if they'd stayed in their own proper-sized cabins, some of them, probably the children, wouldn't have survived. William Schaefer came to Clara's cabin on December 26th, after the town had somewhat recovered from the storm. He stood looking at the tiny structure that had saved 18 people, while his own large, well-built house had nearly killed his family from inadequate heating capacity. "I was completely wrong," he said simply. "About everything, about size, about efficiency, about what constitutes proper construction. Your cabin saved 18 lives with minimal fuel. My cabin nearly killed my family despite maximum heating effort. Small is better when weather gets lethal. You understood that. I didn't." The community's transformation was immediate and total. The dollhouse that had been a joke for 6 months became the most discussed architectural achievement in Nebraska territory. Within days of the blizzard ending, families were asking Clara to explain the principles that had saved 18 lives. She held an informal gathering in the general store, the largest indoor space in Milbrook, and taught volume mathematics to 30 adults who'd never considered cubic feet as survival metrics, showed them how to calculate interior volume, how to determine BTU requirements, how to understand that heating efficiency isn't about stove size, but about space size. A 16 by 20 cabin with 8-foot ceiling is 2,560 cubic feet, she explained, drawing dimensions on a slate board. To maintain 65 degrees when it's -30 outside, a 95-degree difference, you need approximately 12 BTU per cubic foot per hour. That's 30,700 BTU. A standard cast iron stove produces about 15,000 BTU burning continuously. You can't possibly maintain temperature. You're heating space that's too large for your heat source. But your cabin maintained temperature, Margaret Foster said, no longer skeptical but genuinely seeking understanding. How? 560 cubic feet requires 6,700 BTU for the same 95-degree difference. My small stove produces 4,000 BTU. Body heat from one person adds 100 BTU. Together, that's more than adequate. Add 18 people's body heat, 1,800 BTU, and the space actually becomes too warm. We had to vent occasionally to prevent overheating. The mathematics were undeniable. The physics were clear. Small spaces heat efficiently, not because of better stoves, but because of better ratios between heat production and volume heated. By February, 7 families had started construction on secondary emergency cabins. Not replacements for their primary homes, but compact backup shelters for extreme weather. William Schaefer, who'd refused to build Clara's original cabin, volunteered his time to help construct these emergency shelters properly. He taught proper framing, while Clara taught proper sizing. The combination of his building skills and her engineering knowledge created structures that were both well-built and properly designed. The Henderson family built a 10 by 12 cabin, 120 square feet, that could comfortably heat their family of 6 during emergencies while using their larger home during normal weather. The Schmidt family built 2 8 by 10 shelters, figuring that dividing their large family between 2 small, warm spaces was better than trying to heat one large, cold space. By the following winter, 13 families in Milbrook had emergency shelters designed using Clara's principles. When a second severe cold snap hit in January 1885, not as extreme as the 1883 blizzard, but still reaching -25 degrees, families used their compact shelters voluntarily, moved into tiny warm spaces for the duration of the cold, rather than struggling to heat large cold homes. The practice spread beyond Milbrook. Traveling salesmen carried stories of the tiny cabins that saved lives. Homesteaders visiting town for supplies asked about the designs. The postmistress who'd built the dollhouse became known across eastern Nebraska territory as the woman who understood heating mathematics. Clara never married, served as Milbrook's postmistress for 28 years, lived in her 80 square feet the entire time, comfortable in a space everyone had initially pitied, became known across Nebraska territory not as the odd woman in the tiny house, but as the architect who understood that compact saves lives. She died in 1911 at age 56. Her funeral was attended by families whose children had survived the 1883 blizzard because she'd built small instead of big. The obituary focused on her postal service but gave equal space to her architectural contribution. The cabin that proved tiny is optimal when physics matters. The structure still stands, maintained by the Nebraska State Historical Society as a demonstration of thermal efficiency principles. Modern analysis confirms Clara's calculations exactly. 560 cubic feet requires 1/5 the heating energy of 2,560 cubic feet. During extreme cold with limited fuel, that difference is survival versus death. The historical marker reads Clara Whitfield, 1855 to 1911, postmistress and architect, designed thermally efficient compact dwelling in 1883 based on ship's cabin principles. Structure sheltered 18 people during historic blizzard, demonstrating that engineering efficiency matters more than conventional size. Changed frontier understanding of emergency shelter design. But the real story is simpler. About the woman who built a dollhouse while everyone laughed, who lived in 80 square feet while everyone pitied, who saved 18 people when everyone's proper cabins failed. The cabin still stands. Still 8 by 10 feet. Still tiny. Still proving that Clara Whitfield was right and everyone who mocked her was wrong. That her shipwright father's wisdom about compact spaces applied perfectly to prairie survival. That small isn't inadequate. Small is exactly right when mathematics matters more than pride. And that sometimes the cabin everyone calls a joke is the only cabin that works when it really counts.